on October 25, 1944. From the escort carrier USS St. Lo, pilot Ensign William Brooks spotted Japanese battleships on the horizon, pagoda masts emerging from the morning haze 17 miles to the northwest. This was impossible. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet was supposed to be guarding San Bernardino Strait to the north. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Task Unit 77.4.3, known as Taffy 3, demanded confirmation from the bridge of the USS Fanshawe Bay. Japanese battleships should not be there. Brooks, however, was seeing Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's Center Force, the most powerful Japanese surface fleet since the Battle of Midway, approaching at 27 knots. Kurita's force was massive. 4 battleships, including the 72,000-ton Yamato with her 9 18.1-inch guns, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. These were warships designed to destroy any ship in the world. They were headed straight for Taffy 3. 6 escort carriers and their screen of 3 Fletcher-class destroyers and 4 smaller destroyer escorts. The escort carriers were converted merchant hulls, built in shipyards that usually made cargo vessels. They were slow, lightly armored, and armed only with a single 5-inch gun each. Their aircraft were mainly configured for ground support, not anti-ship strikes. The destroyers were fast, but lightly armored. The destroyer escorts were even smaller submarine hunters. Their thin hulls led crews to call them tin cans. The odds were hopeless. The Japanese had guns firing 3,000-pound shells over 25 miles, while the American destroyers fired 54-pound shells with a maximum range of 10 miles. This was not a battle, it was an execution. Kurita's center force had slipped through San Bernardino Strait undetected. Halsey, having taken the bait of a Japanese decoy force, had raced north, leaving the Leyte Gulf invasion beaches, where 130,000 American soldiers were dependent on naval support, wide open. Taffy 3 was the only force standing between Kurita and disaster. At 6:45 a.m., Japanese float planes were spotting for the fleet. Sprague ordered all ships to launch every aircraft that could fly, armed or not, and changed course toward a rain squall on the horizon. At 6:58 a.m., the Japanese battle line opened fire. Yamato's 18-inch shells, designed to penetrate 30-inch battleship armor, punched clean through the unarmored escort carriers or could tear one in half if they exploded inside. The sea around Taffy 3 erupted in 200-foot-tall colored waterspouts from the Japanese dye-marked shells. Sprague sent a plain-language distress call for immediate assistance. On the destroyer USS Johnston, Commander Ernest Evans, a Native American graduate of the Naval Academy, didn't wait for orders. Having promised his crew that the Johnston would be a fighting ship that went in harm's way, Evans commanded all-ahead flank full left rudder, turning his 2,200-ton destroyer towards 4 battleships displacing over 200,000 tons combined. It was suicide, but Evans knew that every minute the Japanese spent dealing with his ship was a minute the carriers could run. At 7:10 a.m., Johnston was making a thick smokescreen and firing her 5-inch guns at the heavy cruiser Kumano. The small shells couldn't penetrate the cruiser's 8-inch armor, but were wrecking her superstructure. At maximum torpedo range, Evans launched all 10 Mark 15 torpedoes at Kumano, then kept closing and firing. Within 15 minutes, Johnston pumped over 200 shells into the cruiser. At 7:24 a.m., 1 or 3 torpedo hits blew Kumano's bow off, crippling her and forcing the heavy cruiser Suzuya to escort her out of formation. Evans, in his first attack, had removed 2 heavy cruisers from the battle. But Johnston had been spotted. Yamato's secondary battery of 6-inch guns opened fire, hitting Johnston 3 times simultaneously. 1 shell destroyed the after engine room, another wrecked a gun mount, and a third hit the bridge. Commander Evans was torn apart, his shirt burnt away and his left hand maimed. Others were killed instantly, but Evans stayed at his post, wrapping his shirt around his wounded hand, continuing to steer the ship. More shells followed, tearing through Johnston like tissue paper. Electrical power failed, and steering was lost from the bridge, yet the ship stayed afloat. He shifted steering control to the after steering compartment.
At 7:16 a.m., Sprague gave the order, "Small boys attack, launch torpedo attack." The destroyer USS Hull, despite a malfunctioning radio, charged the nearest battleship, Kongo. Japanese shells walked up her wake. At extreme range, Commander Leon Kintberger launched half his torpedoes, forcing Kongo to turn away. Hull then launched her remaining 5 torpedoes at the heavy cruiser Haguro, forcing it to evade. The American torpedoes missed, but they disrupted the Japanese fire. Multiple Japanese ships converged their fire on Hull, tearing her apart with shells up to 16 inches. In 40 minutes, she took over 40 major caliber hits. But Hull had forced the Japanese to maneuver, disrupted their formation, and bought precious minutes for the carriers to escape into a providential rain squall. The destroyer USS Herman, commanded by Commander Amos Hathaway, raced across the formation. Emerging from the smokescreen, Hathaway found himself facing 4 Japanese battleships in a column. He didn't hesitate, ordering his destroyer straight at them. At 4,400 yards, suicidally close, Herman launched torpedoes, forcing Kongo and Haruna to evade. Herman then fired her last torpedoes at Yamato. Yamato's lookout spotted the wakes, and Admiral Kurita, whose original flagship had been sunk by submarines 2 days earlier, ordered the massive battleship to turn north to evade. For 10 critical minutes, the most powerful battleship in the world was heading away from the battle. By the time Kurita turned around, the engagement was a confused melee. The destroyer escorts were also attacking. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland of the USS Samuel B. Roberts, a ship built to hunt submarines, grabbed the intercom and told his crew, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." Pushing the engines past their limit to reach 28 knots, Samuel B. Roberts charged. At 4,000 yards from the heavy cruiser Chokai, impossibly close, Roberts launched her 3 torpedoes. She then opened fire with her 2 5-inch guns, pumping armor-piercing shells into the cruiser at point-blank range. The Japanese ships, however, couldn't depress their guns enough to hit the tiny destroyer escort at such close range, and shells passed overhead or punched through the ship without exploding. In one gun mount, Gunner's Mate 3rd Class Paul Henry Carr was performing miracles. His crew was firing 6 rounds per minute, twice the designed rate, despite the gun being so hot that shells were starting to cook off. By 8:15 a.m., the battle was total chaos. Rain squalls and smoke reduced visibility, and Japanese ships were firing at each other. Admiral Kurita was confused. His lookouts were reporting they were fighting 30,000-ton Essex-class fleet carriers and cruisers, not the small escort carriers. The aggression of the American destroyers led Kurita to believe he was facing a task group from Halsey's Third Fleet, an illusion compounded by his order for a general attack, which scattered his forces. Meanwhile, American pilots were attacking with everything they had. One air group commander made 10 attack runs against Japanese ships without any ammunition at all, simply diving to force the ships to maneuver and throw off their aim. Other pilots strafed battleships with machine guns or dropped 100-pound anti-personnel bombs and depth charges, all adding to the confusion. At 8:30 a.m., USS Hull was finished. Hit over 40 times and surrounded, Commander Kintberger gave the order to abandon ship. She rolled over and sank at 8:55 a.m., with 253 men lost. At 8:42 a.m., Samuel B. Roberts took 3 8-inch cells in rapid succession. One tore a 40-foot hole in her port side. Another destroyed her engine power. The third was a direct hit on gun mount 52. The explosion was catastrophic, instantly killing most of the 10-man crew. Paul Carr, ripped open from neck to groin and dying, was found by a repair party holding a 54-pound shell, begging someone to help him load one more round. He died holding that shell. Samuel B. Roberts sank at 10:05 a.m., losing 89 men. Back on Johnston, Commander Evans, bleeding from his wounds, shifted command to the after steering station. At 8:20 a.m., he emerged from the smokescreen to face a Congo-class battleship at 7,000 yards. The crippled destroyer engaged in a point-blank gun duel for 40 minutes. He wasn't trying to sink her, but to distract her and ruin her fire control, keeping her from targeting the carriers. At 9 a.m., Japanese destroyers surrounded Johnston, pumping shells into her. With no power and no functioning guns, Evans gave the order to abandon ship. He was last seen helping wounded sailors into life rafts before his ship sank at 9:10 a.m. His body was never found. As Johnston sank, the captain of the passing Japanese destroyer Yuki Kazi ordered his crew to stand at attention and salute the sinking American ship.
The escort carrier Gambia Bay, the rearmost carrier, was taking hits from Yamato and multiple cruisers. An 8-inch shell from the cruiser Chikuma penetrated her engine room and she lost speed. At 9:07 a.m., Gambia Bay capsized and sank, the only American aircraft carrier ever sunk by naval gunfire. She had lasted over 2 hours under fire, allowing the other 5 carriers to escape. By 9 a.m., 3 heavy cruisers were out of action. Chokai was burning, Kumano was crippled, and Chikuma was damaged from over 35-inch shells and torpedo attacks from aircraft. Then at 9:11 a.m., just as the Japanese seemed on the verge of breaking through, Admiral Kurita ordered his ships to cease fire and withdraw to the north. Historians still debate why. Kurita was exhausted, having lost his flagship and the super battleship Musashi in the preceding days, and had transferred his flag to the Yamato. Crucially, Yamato's 10-minute evasion run had taken Kurita out of command, scattering his forces and ruining tactical control. American air attacks were intensifying, and the sheer aggression of the American defense, destroyers charging battleships, created an illusion that Kurita was facing the vanguard of a much larger force. The Japanese commanders thought they were fighting Halsey's Third Fleet, believing the 8,000-ton escort carriers were 30,000-ton fleet carriers. The aggression itself became a weapon, creating an illusion of strength that didn't exist. At 9:25 a.m., the Japanese were withdrawing. The survivors of Taffy 3 watched the pagoda masts disappear. They had faced a force with 10 times their firepower and survived. The cost was terrible. USS Johnston was gone with 141 dead, USS Hoole with 253 dead, USS Samuel B. Roberts with 89 dead, and USS Gambia Bay with 131 dead. Survivors spent 50 hours in shark-infested waters before rescue. The escort carrier St. Lo was sunk by a kamikaze attack an hour after the surface battle ended. The Battle of Samar was over, but its effects were profound. The Japanese combined fleet never mounted another major offensive operation. Admiral Kurita admitted the American defense was so valiant and skillful that he believed he was facing a much stronger force. Admiral Nimitz called it the finest hour of the entire Pacific War. The courage of Taffy 3 had saved the invasion. Commander Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first Native American in the Navy to receive it. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland received the Navy Cross, and Paul Henry Carr was awarded the Silver Star posthumously. The Tin Can sailors embraced the insult. These were cheap escorts with thin armor, but they had hearts of iron. When faced with annihilation, they attacked, buying time with their lives. In attacking, they sank 3 heavy cruisers, damaged 3 more, and turned back the pride of the Imperial Navy. The statistics don't measure courage, determination, or the power of men who knew they were going to die, but attacked anyway. The wrecks of the Johnston and Samuel B. Roberts, found miles deep in the Pacific, still sit upright, their guns pointed toward the enemy, a defiant testament to their last stand. The destroyer USS Herman was the only destroyer of Taffy 3 to survive. The American destroyers attacked so aggressively The Japanese officers believed they must be screening capital ships. They had been psychologically defeated. As one Japanese captain said, "We had the guns, but they had the spirit." The lesson of the Battle of Samar is that ordinary people, faced with extraordinary circumstances, can choose to be heroes. They choose to charge when retreat makes sense, choosing to die on their feet. The Japanese had every advantage, except one. They were fighting Americans who wouldn't quit. In the end, that made all the difference.